Chapter 15 Hospice with Love. Namaste. I honor the place in you where the entire universe resides. I honor that place with you of love, of light, of truth, of peace. I honor that place in you where, when you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, there is only one of us. Mahatma Gandhi. In her mid-20s, Kathleen donned white coveralls every day and assembled 50-caliber machine gun bullets for the troops fighting in World War II. At the end of her shift, she pulled off the coveralls, dropped them in the factory laundry bin, and showered to remove the dangerous gunpowder that inevitably clung to her after hours of handling ammunition. In her free time, she learned how to fly. She was one of the few women to take the private pilot course at the tiny airstrip nearby. One day, she put a plane into a practice stall above a pasture. As the aircraft began to fall, she restarted the engine, leveled the aircraft, and took in a sharp breath. She hadn't noticed the electric lines stretching along the edge of the field. Not sure the plane had enough power to quickly thrust upward, Kathleen flew below the lines and made a safe landing at the airport. Now 85 and living in my suburban home, my mom couldn't fathom that the stairs were too dangerous for her. She had been confined to a bedroom on the second floor for weeks, and it was making her stir-crazy. She wanted to be part of the family. The home health aide had chided, "It's too risky. You're too weak to manage the steps." True, she had Parkinson's disease and a defective heart valve, but it hadn't been that long since she had pushed a boogie board into a cove off Maui with her grandson Aaron on one side and me on the other. My mom couldn't swim anymore, but she could look through the plastic viewer in the boogie board to see the aquatic life below. That was as close to snorkeling as she was going to get. Now 2 aides from a local hospice service hovered over her, preventing her from even going downstairs. Seeing her so stifled, I arranged for a new caregiver to come to the house, this one trained by Silverado. "I want to go downstairs," my mom told the young woman in no uncertain terms. The caregiver nodded and replied, "I think I have an idea." That afternoon, when I returned from work, my mother was on the couch in the first-floor family room, a grandchild on either side, all three laughing. When she caught my eye, her smile conveyed joy along with a small measure of "I told you so." It was true that my mother could no longer safely navigate the stairs. With assistance, however, she could sit on the top step and descend the stairs on her backside. "If you can't fly over the power lines, go under them," my mom told me. As you gathered, Kathleen is my mother. In early 2003, doctors determined my mother was in the last 6 months of her life and recommended hospice services. At that time, Silverado was in the planning stages of its own hospice program and home care services. Having been intimately involved in the process, I thought I knew what to expect when the local hospice sent aides to my house to care for my mother. I soon found that researching hospice was one thing, experiencing it was another. The aides were conscientious in giving medications, helping my mother bathe, and handling other standard duties. What they lacked was feeling. They made little effort to get to know her as a person and to understand her motivation. In my opinion, this aspect of healthcare was fundamental, whether hospice, home care, assisted living, or hospital. The Silverado associate who devised the way for my mother to go down the stairs understood her yearnings for freedom and accomplishment. Rather than discourage my mother, the associate focused on how to help her fulfill her desires. When hospice personnel told me my mother had entered into active dying, that is, that her death was imminent, I was shocked that the hospice nurse would not stay throughout the process. It was against company policy. Only several outraged calls to the service's top management yield a reversal of that stance. The memory of having to take time and energy to badger the hospice administrators at such a difficult time still bothers me. Because of the nature of Alzheimer's and many other dementias, the end of life occurs for almost all Silverado residents at its communities. Most receive hospice care, a service recommended by health professionals when an individual is determined to have entered the final 6 months of life. Previously, outside hospice organizations had come to Silverado to work side by side with Silverado caregivers, But the Silverado staff were in hearty agreement. We could do this ourselves so much better. We need to offer hospice. My experience with the adequate but dispassionate care provided to my mother made me realize what they were talking about. The act of dying is a significant part of life. Silverado's mission of nurturing the spirit to the fullest extent needed to be carried on until the very last moments. As a result, Silverado's mission would not just be to exceed current standards of hospice care, but to create an environment that enabled people to experience death on their own terms. The new Silverado Hospice would take into consideration the remaining possibilities for their lives, with the ultimate goal of providing self-satisfaction and a sense of completeness to individuals and their loved ones. Love is greater than fear is Silverado's core operating principle. It is especially relevant for Silverado Hospice, where patients, families, and associates are confronting what frightens people most: imminent mortality. Fear of death keeps society from talking about it. Fear keeps individuals from planning for it. And all too often, fear keeps those approaching the end of life from connecting with the world around them. Silverado has identified 4 objectives for their hospice program. The first is normalization. The concept of normalization for people with dementia has been central to Silverado from the start, so extending it to include people without dementia at the end of life was only natural. Normalization enables hospice patients to enjoy daily routines and diversions that are standard for all adults, regardless of the anticipated date of passing away. Normal activities include getting out of bed and dressing in the morning to participate in pastimes of personal interest. Why exclude hospice patients from reasonable activities at this time of life? Telling a dying woman like my mother that going down a flight of stairs was too dangerous limited her spirit as she sought to stay connected to the world. As she demonstrated, there is dignity, purpose, and fulfillment in risk when handled in the right way. The second objective of Silverado's hospice program is making the most of life. Pleasures and purpose are meaningful at any stage in life, but vitally important in the final stage. Silverado Hospice endeavors to bring enjoyment and focus to each day. In addition, Silverado honors and preserves individual life experiences through the Memory Catcher program, in which patients are interviewed on video about their lives and are given the opportunity to express important thoughts and feelings for their loved ones to remember. The third objective is guiding patients and families through the end-of-life process. When illness starts to diminish the quality of life, feelings of uncertainty can be overwhelming. Silverado works with those in its care as well as their loved ones to explain what is taking place and what is likely to transpire. Further, it strives to identify and fulfill individual preferences and to bring the patient and family to the same understanding. Using the Go Wish program, Silverado encourages patients to pinpoint what matters most to them at end of life and to indicate if there is anything special they would like to achieve at this time. For example, they may wish to limit pain medication in order to be as alert as possible, or they may have unfinished business, such as family estrangements, they would like to mend. Once Silverado identifies end-of-life wishes, the staff strives to make them a reality. After the patient's life has ended, Silverado assists families and friends in coping with the grieving process, offering a wide range of bereavement groups and one-on-one counseling. Participants may attend for as long as they wish. The groups are open to anyone who would like to take part, regardless of whether they have been a Silverado client. The fourth objective of Silverado's hospice is connecting with the human spirit, no matter how hidden it may seem. People whose loved ones have Alzheimer's disease can understandably be shaken by the loss of faculties. When the patients can no longer recognize a spouse, child, or close friend, and can no longer communicate with intelligible speech, it can seem to the family that the patient died even before hospice began. But Silverado, sensitive to those feelings, continues to make sustaining the spirit of the memory-impaired person an important focus for the hospice team. Spiritual care coordinators from a variety of faiths understand and agree that their responsibility at Silverado Hospice is to create an atmosphere that leads to spiritual encounter and growth. The connection does not have to be based on religion, although it can be if that is what the patient wishes. One spiritual care coordinator calls Silverado's approach sacred presence. The very description suggests that each visit to a patient is like entering sacred space. An unresponsive patient is greeted with no less expectation than the most alert and verbal patient. To the best of Silverado's ability, no one will die alone. When the process of active dying starts, staff is in constant communication with families so they can be present if that is what the patient and loved one desires. Silverado also provides a continuing personal presence, committed to being physically and emotionally available for the patient and family at all times. "You're here to put me in a nursing home, aren't you?" Mandy said, eyeing Libby with suspicion. "That's why you keep coming around. Don't think I don't know it." Mandy, a woman in her 50s, was angry and in despair over her terminal illness. Though pale from cancer that could no longer be controlled and too weak to rise on her own from her living room couch, Mandy's voice still carried with startling force. "I'm not going." "No, that is not why I'm here," Libby protested as she leaned forward in the easy chair facing Mandy. "We all know you want to stay home, and I'm as committed to that as everyone else on our team." Mandy looked skeptical. In the 3 years since her illness had been discovered, various healthcare professionals had told Mandy her increasing needs would make moving to a nursing home inevitable. Recently, Silverado Hospice had begun caring for her in the white stucco home she shared with her husband, Jeff. As a Silverado Hospice social worker, Libby was part of the care team, but her presence clearly alarmed Mandy. "I've talked to social workers before, and they've all told me I would have to go," Mandy said. "I understand your concern," Libby said, "but believe me, I will do all I can so you can remain right here." It took more discussion at times, heated on Mandy's part, to convince her of Libby's purpose on the hospice team, which was to focus on the psychological and emotional well-being of Mandy and her family. Providing this kind of assistance to others in the last stages of their lives gave Libby the meaning she was searching for when she left her interior design career to pursue social work. Once Mandy's fears were allayed, she and Libby turned to chatting casually. It was the kind of conversation that two women anywhere could have had, and it brought a comfortable normality to the situation. When Mandy's attention was turned towards things she could still look forward to, it helped greatly. In a previous conversation, Libby had asked Mandy what was on her bucket list. When Mandy said she didn't have one, Libby had encouraged her to think about what she would like to do and to write it down. Her response had been noncommittal. Now Mandy said, "I haven't told anyone, but I did make that list you talked about." "Oh, that's wonderful," Libby said. "What's on it?" "Well, this and that," Mandy said. Libby could tell that even with their new understanding of each other, Mandy wasn't yet sure how much she wanted to share. But by mentioning the list, Mandy had created an opening for an important subject. Libby knew it was crucial to respond in just the right way. "Could you tell me what's at the top of the list?" she asked gently. "If we can help you make it happen, we'd be honored." Mandy was quiet for a few moments, long enough for Libby to notice the grandfather clock in the corner ticking loudly. Finally, Mandy said, "I'd like to have a red lobster dinner." Her illness had prevented her from eating anything rich for a long time. Libby checked with Mandy's physician and was given the all clear, so she began working on the arrangements. Libby knew that Mandy would be too frail to go to a crowded restaurant, and takeout wasn't available. When Silverado's home office contacted Red Lobster headquarters to explain the situation, the company offered to send 2 employees with the food to Mandy's home free of charge. That evening, Libby and a pair of Silverado Hospice volunteers set a table with linens, silver, and china for Mandy and her husband Jeff to enjoy the fare in elegance. After the couple finished dinner, Mandy said, "I never explained why I wanted this." Lifting a hand to her cheek to wipe away a tear, Mandy continued, "It was during a dinner at Red Lobster 10 years ago that Jeff first told me he loved me." A few days later, Mandy confided to Libby that their wedding had been a civil ceremony with a justice of the peace. Another wish on her list was to exchange vows with Jeff in the Catholic cathedral in their city of Houston. Libby agreed to try to arrange it, but she knew pulling off a ceremony in a short amount of time would stump even the most seasoned of wedding planners. When she called the cathedral, she wasn't surprised to learn it was booked solid for weddings for the next 18 months. But to be sure, Libby coaxed the scheduler, "Could you double check the third Saturday of next month?" Doubtful but willing, the scheduler placed Libby on hold for a few minutes. When he returned to the line, he said, "This is amazing. I don't know how or why, but the afternoon of that day is available. If you'd like it, it's yours." Details began falling into place as a result of a news report on the special dinner and her wish for a cathedral ceremony. A florist called offering arrangements, bouquets, and decorations for free. Not long after, a photographer offered her services at no charge. People across the city wanted to help Mandy. Libby's phone continued to ring. A bakery, a wedding gown shop, a hairstylist, and a makeup artist all volunteered as well. On the day of the wedding, Mandy, clad in a three-quarter length white dress and holding a red and white bouquet, rolled into the cathedral in a wheelchair wreathed with fresh white flowers and greenery. White gauze cascaded along its sides. Arriving at the aisle, Mandy insisted on stopping and held out her arm to the man pushing the chair. The guest gasped as Mandy put her hand on the man's forearm and stood. The pair began walking towards the altar where Jeff was waiting. Mandy moved haltingly, and over one shoulder she carried the portable oxygen unit, feeding the tubes hooked to her nose. But she had a grace that any bride would envy. Tara lived with her grandparents from age 9 to 18 and was a constant visitor in their home in the decades that followed. Merle, her grandmother, was her inspiration and role model. At Silverado, Tara was a volunteer coordinator and manager of the Memory Catcher program. By recording video interviews, she obtained unique histories of patients' lives and helped preserve personal messages to families and friends. When her grandmother entered the care of Silverado Hospice, the program became very personal for Tara. One morning, she set up a video camera across from Merle and took a seat facing her. "Grandma, could you please tell me the story one more time?" "You want to hear it again?" Merle responded in a warm, teasing tone Tara knew so well. "Yes, from the very beginning," Tara said. "Tell me the whole thing." Merle didn't have to ask her grandmother which story she meant. Tara had begged her over and over again to hear the tale since she was 6 years old. "Well," Merle began, "I was 13 years old. There was a new girl at school, and we became friends. One day she and I were having a snack in her kitchen, and her brother Jerry came in. She stopped as she customarily did at this point. "What was he like?" Tara asked. Merle smiled. Tara always asked that question. It was part of the story's ritual. "At first, I didn't pay him any mind," Merle chuckled. "But he kept standing there, leaning against the icebox, and I got the feeling he was watching me. So I turned to look at him, and guess what?" She paused again. "What?" said Tara, as expected. "He had the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen," Merle said. Over the next 2 months, Jerry barely said more than hello when they ran into each other during her visits to the house. But he secretly badgered her sister for more information about her friend, and Merle likewise tried to get details about him. When Jerry finally gathered his nerve and invited Merle out for an ice cream sundae, it just took that one date for them to realize they were meant for each other. While she was still in high school, Merle bought her wedding dress, but the couple's plans to marry after graduation were stymied by World War II. Jerry was drafted, sent to the South Pacific. He was chosen to be part of a group working with a new technology called radar. For 4 years, Jerry and Merle didn't see each other, but Merle never so much as looked at another man during that time. Merle took another pause. "Why?" Tara asked as anticipated. "Why were you willing to wait so long for Grandpa when you could have been dating other boys?" "Because I loved him," Merle said, reaching over and covering Merle's hands with her eyes. Tara asked, "If you could tell Grandpa anything, what would you want him to know?" Not once in the decades since Tara first heard the story had she asked Merle that question. But the change in ritual didn't surprise her grandmother. Merle and Tara understood that sharing the story this time was different. "I would want Jerry to know that I love him," Merle answered. Devastated as Tara was when Merle passed away 4 weeks later, she knew it was worse for Jerry, also a Silverado Hospice patient. 3 months after Merle's death, when Tara felt strong enough to bring up the subject without crying, she said to Jerry, "Grandpa, if you could, would you want to see Grandma again?" "Oh, honey, of course I would," he replied. "If only it were possible. I would want that more than anything." Tara's laptop was on the small table in front of Jerry, and her headphones covered his ears. She leaned across his lap to click an icon on the computer, willing herself to appear calm, not knowing how her grandfather would react. As Merle's face suddenly filled the screen, Jerry's eyes widened, tears welling. He drew a short breath as her mouth began moving. He stretched out his hand to touch the computer, pressing Merle's image. Jerry smiled for the first time since her passing. Jenna, a Silverado Hospice social worker, accompanied 85-year-old Randall onto the patio of his skilled nursing facility. An aide helped him from his wheelchair to a cushioned wicker seat while Jenna adjusted an umbrella to provide shade. "It's beautiful out here," she told the aide. "Will you come back for us in an hour?" "Certainly," he said. The aide went into the building, and Jenna pulled a chair over so she could face Randall. 8 months earlier, Parkinson's disease had brought Randall to the nursing facility. Although he was able to stand, he could no longer walk. Recently, doctors had determined that the end of life was approaching. Silverado's hospice, which often provides services to patients at other senior living centers, started visiting him. This man, whose engaging smile was undimmed by illness, had captivated Jenna. When Randall had said he was eager for winter weather to end so he could go out in the fresh air, Jenna began keeping an eye on the forecast. With warm sunshine expected for this day, she blocked the afternoon on her calendar with the word Randall. After he settled into his seat with a sigh of pleasure, she leaned towards him. "Randall, there's a question I'd like to ask you," she began. "All right," he said. "I am wondering if there are some things you might like to accomplish in the next few months," she said. Randall said. "It's not something I've thought about." "That's fine," Jenna said reassuringly, "but I'd like to suggest you consider it. At this phase of life, it's important to think about whether there are things left undone or unsaid. If there are, there's still time to accomplish them." He looked at her, but didn't say anything. "If you'd like, I could help you think about it," she said. "Would that be all right?" When he nodded, Jenna said, "Give me a moment." She stood and brought a small table over to sit down between the two chairs. Then she sat and reached into her handbag to pull out a deck of cards. "We aren't going to play poker," she said with a smile, in response to Randall's obvious surprise. "This is a game called Go Wish." Jenna explained that the cards contain things that people often say are important to them in the final stage of life. She would read each card aloud to Randall. Then he was to tell her if it was very important to me, somewhat important to me, or not important to me. Randall nodded again, so Jenna shuffled the deck and turned the top card over. "To have my family with me," she read. "Randall, is that very important, somewhat important, or not important to you?" "Very important," he said. Jenna placed the card face down on the table and read the next one. "To say goodbye to important people in my life." "Not important," Randall said. "Well, what I mean is that they all already know how I feel about them." She put the card on the table, a short distance from the first one, then she turned over another card. "To feel my life is complete." Randall's expression became thoughtful, and a few moments passed. She broke the silence by saying, "Randall, I noticed there's a model airplane on your nightstand. Who built it?" A slow smile spread across Randall's face. "I did," he said. "When?" she asked. "A long time ago," he answered. He was 15. For 3 weeks, he spent every waking hour outside of school and chores building the tiny aircraft to enter in a competition sponsored by the local newspaper. When he received a letter from the judges, he had to read it 3 times before believing he had won the top prize, a free plane ride. It was his first ever flight. In World War II, Randall was chosen to pilot a B-25 Mitchell bomber. At the end, he became a firefighter for 38 years and always served as an airport paramedic. In his spare time, he taught flying lessons, once flying a 2-seater the length of the Grand Canyon. He had also climbed almost every peak in Utah's Uinta Mountains, saying, "It was as close as possible to being in the air while still on land." "What did your wife think about your flying?" Jenna asked him. "Sharon encouraged it," Randall said. "She always said I wouldn't be myself without it." He smiled and continued, "You know, I flew her across the United States on our second date. I would have done it on our first date, but I didn't want to scare her off." They both laughed. Then Jenna said, "So the card I read to you a little while ago, the one that says, 'To feel my life is complete.' If you could, would you want to fly over those mountains with Sharon one more time?" "Oh, yes," Randall said without hesitation. "That would be more important than anything." It took a number of phone calls, but Jenna found a pilot willing to fly the couple over the mountain range. Then she explained that Randall's wish followed a lifelong passion for flying. He said he would be honored to do it at no charge. The date that the pilot was available was Randall and Sharon's 58th wedding anniversary. Jenna and her Silverado Hospice colleagues arranged for a van to transport Randall and Sharon to and from the airport and for a nurse to be on hand in case Randall needed medical attention. Alerted by Silverado Hospice, 2 airport firefighters were waiting as the van pulled up to the 4-seat Cessna. "That's my favorite plane," Randall exclaimed as he was lowered to his wheelchair. As the firefighters approached to assist him into the plane, he gestured for them to wait. Only after rising slowly to his feet did he take their arms. While Sharon stepped up into the plane and settled into the back seat, he waited, a firefighter on either side. Then he nodded, and the firefighters boosted him into the front seat next to the pilot, who greeted him warmly. Once he was secured in his seat, they closed the door. After a few moments, the pilot tipped his window open and called out, "Clear." There was a pop-pop sound, then a whining as the propellers began turning. The engine caught and the Cessna rumbled away. Jenna and the others watched as it paused near the runway, then taxied onto it and abruptly surged forward, rising into the air, rapidly becoming a small dot against the cloudless sky. 2 hours later, Randall and Sharon were smiling, waving from the Cessna's window when the plane taxied towards Jenna and the rest of the group. Hurrying to meet it, the firefighters opened the door on Randall's side and helped him into his wheelchair, and then Sharon and the pilot got out. "When you let someone else do the flying, you sure see a lot more," Randall said to the group. Everyone laughed, and Sharon took her husband's hand, explaining that they had flown over canyons, lakes, and the craggy peaks towards the north of the range. "Randall really knows the Unitas," the pilot said, smiling. "It was a great tour for me, too." "We saw so much," Sharon said. "It was beautiful, just beautiful." Randall cleared his throat and said, "Sharon and I want to thank you all for doing this for us." In the period that followed, Randall confounded the doctors. Instead of worsening, he began to improve. After 6 months of care by Silverado Hospice, he no longer needed its services and was discharged. Randall was able to leave the skilled nursing facility and move back home. He lived there happily with Sharon for another year before passing away, his life complete.